Hey, everybody, welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Yes, I'll tell you this. Integrity is something we all value, but we don't always want to talk about it. It's perhaps easier to talk about skills or competencies or even strategy. But integrity can build any business or individual or debilitate that same business or individual. So today, we're going to talk about integrity with an expert on the topic. And you may be here live. And if you are, we're glad you're here live. You can ask any questions, share whatever you've got. And we'd love it if you would do that. And this is a future episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. So if you're here live, you're getting it early. And so we hope that you'll give us your input. And if you're not getting the podcast regularly, or if you're listening to this later on the podcast and you'd like to get a head start on some of these episodes, you can do that by joining our Facebook group, remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook, or our LinkedIn group, both places we are now, at remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to get there. So in the future, you can see these live. But here we are right here today with our guest, Rob Chesnut. Let me tell you about Rob, and then we're going to dive in. He's there smiling. And we are going to talk about intentional integrity. Let me tell you about Rob. Rob is a graduate of the Harvard Law School and the University of Virginia. He worked for 14 years with the U.S. Justice Department, where he prosecuted bank robberies, kidnappings, murder, and espionage cases. There's like a whole episode right there. He joined eBay in 1999 as its third lawyer, where he led eBay's North American legal team. He subsequently spent nearly 6 years as the general counsel and first attorney at the digital education leader Chegg, and he's also been the general counsel and chief ethics officer at Airbnb. His new book, Intentional Integrity: How Smart Companies Can Lead an Ethical Revolution, supports his work with companies to help them develop strategies to drive integrity into their cultures. Rob, welcome.
Kevin, thanks for having me.
Hey, you actually promise that we can make ethics human and fun. So with that, how's that for a lead in?
Let's do it. I think let's live up to it. I think we can do it.
So, okay, you don't wake up as a 6-year-old. Most 6-year-olds, they wanted to be an astronaut, a fireman, police officer, whatever, president of the United States, maybe. No one wanted to become the chief ethics officer at Airbnb. Like, how do you tell us about the process of that led, just a little bit about your journey that got you to this point?
Well, at 6, it was wanting to play pro basketball,
Okay.
But that dream ended early.
How tall are you, Rob?
Yeah, I'm 6'2", and that's not going to do it. So, but I always wanted to have an impact. You want to have an impact in the world and feel like you're leaving something better than where you found it. And I think I originally believed that politics would be a great way to do it. But boy, after I got a little bit of taste of politics by working on a political campaign early in life, that quickly dissuaded me from that route. And I ultimately settled on being a federal prosecutor for a while. To me, that seemed to be very honorable. Law school seemed like good basic training. For being involved in making a positive contribution. The problem with being a prosecutor is that it's very negative work. You are presiding over sort of the end of someone's life in the sense that they're going away for, easily 10, 20 years or more. And after a while, I kind of thought, what? I think business is a way to really change the world. And I got introduced to it because there was this little company in Northern Virginia where I was a prosecutor, and people kept calling me. Prosecutors kept calling. They wanted records from this company. They wanted to prosecute this company. I'm like, who is this company? And it was a little company called AOL. And so I got their little disc. Yeah, well, back then they weren't that big, but they were the only way to get on the internet. So I went out and got one of their discs.
You got the disc.
You remember the disc, right? And you got one of those little cables. Remember when we used to have phones in our home and they had these cables? So I stuck the cable in the back of my computer. I stuck the disc in, and my eyes opened. I'm like, wow, this internet thing is mind-blowing. And one of the companies I started to use was a very small company called eBay. And that's when it really struck me, the power of business to bring people together and to make people's lives better. And that's when I decided that's what I want to do in my life.
So that's a pretty good picture, and it sort of gives us a way to think about integrity as a piece of that puzzle for you. So I think of the book, and I would show everybody the book if I had a physical copy, but all I have is a digital copy. So maybe Rob has a copy. There it is, intentional integrity. There you go. Perfect. Thank you. So
Sure.
when I think about the book, I think about it being a book about culture and integrity, both, right? So you've told us a little bit about your journey, but tell us specifically about why the book. What led you to say, I'm going to write this book?
You know, I never thought really about integrity specifically as a career until I was at Airbnb. And, you know, at Airbnb, I'd been at the company for a little while, and that's when the Me Too movement hit. And I had a company right down the street from me called Uber, and they started getting in a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And what got me thinking was, I sure love learning from other people's mistakes. What can we do at Airbnb? And as the lawyer, like, I'm the one who would have to deal with these things. So I'm like, what can we do proactively? So I'm just not sitting back on my heels waiting for a problem. You know, how can you drive integrity into the culture of a company? And I went and talked to Brian Chesky, you know, the founder of Airbnb.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't know either, but he looked at me in typical Brian fashion and said, go big. And, you know, being empowered by a leader like that is a pretty cool thing. And it got me on this journey of thinking, how do companies think about integrity, and can they do it better? And, you know, when you're focused on something like that and free from your leader to go big, you can do some interesting creative things. And that's what we did at Airbnb. And to my surprise, people at the company really embraced it. I thought people would be like, oh yeah, that's some old lawyer trying to tell us about morality. To the contrary, I found that people want to be proud of the place that they work. You know, it's more than a paycheck. That's a brand that's their personal brand too. It's their life story. I mean, look, when you introduced me a few minutes ago, and you introduced me by talking about the companies that I had worked for.
Right.
So we all want to be proud of the place we work. We want to feel like it has values that align with our own personal values. So I started getting very emotional, powerful reactions from employees at Airbnb when we started talking about integrity. And that's what sort of convinced me that this is almost a hidden superpower, that if companies can tap into it, boy, it can really put the wind at your back and help you.
So I should probably step back and ask you to define, from your perspective, that word integrity. What does that word mean to you, and how do you help an organization define it?
Well, it's about understanding what your North Star is, what your purpose is, and then making sure that your actions are consistent with that North Star. You know, and I'll add the phrase, even when no one's watching, because that's sort of the stock phrase around integrity, right? The problem these days, Kevin, is that everybody's always watching. You know, with the power of the internet, the power of smartphone cameras, somebody's always watching things. So you really don't have the luxury of thinking that something that's gone wrong is just going to be swept under the rug and forgotten. It's going to get out there. Your own employees may be the one to bring it out, right? Employees, if they don't like something, what are they doing today? They used to sit on their hands and say nothing. I think out of fear they might ruin their career. Today, they're talking about it on things like Slack and Blind. They're blogging, they're tweeting, they're even walking out. So, you know, you've got to take integrity seriously and understand that, particularly as a leader, you're always under the microscope.
Yeah, I think that's right. So one of the things that struck me in the book is thinking about the idea of trust and how that connects, especially when we think about integrity at the organizational level. So talk a little bit about the intersection of integrity and trust.
Trust is the foundation, I think, of human personal interactions and business interactions. The problem is that all the data shows that trust is at an all-time low. You know, there's something called the Edelman Trust Survey. They've been doing it for decades, and they measure global views of government, media, companies, religion, and the like. Well, the trust in all of those organizations is at an all-time low. That's powerful because we've got a lot of big problems to solve in the world. And if we're going to solve them, trust has got to be at the heart of this working together to get things done. So fundamental questions got to be, well, how do you get trust up? And when you talk to people and interview people about it, there are two things that drive trust. One is competence, and the other is integrity. So if someone believes that you are competent, that will enhance trust. And if someone believes that you have integrity and are committed to doing the right thing, that builds trust. What's surprising to a lot of people is that they aren't equal. Integrity is actually 3 times as powerful a driver of trust as competence. So we've got to get integrity. We've got to get a focus on integrity if we're going to reinforce trust and therefore actually work together to get things done.
So I listen to you say that, and I think about whenever there's something that's of value that is lacking, having it becomes significant competitive advantage, right? Like we can talk about integrity and trust as good things, and you used the word moral a little while ago, moral things, good things, the right things, all of that. But the reality is if we're doing it and others aren't, not only is it all of that, it's also a competitive advantage. Yeah.
Sure. And the data bears that out. Companies, and this, by the way, Accenture did a big study of it recently, but there are numerous studies now comparing companies that are perceived to act with integrity and with a purpose versus companies that simply don't care about it. The companies that are perceived to have integrity actually outperform the market. They outperform their competitors. And there are 2 reasons for it. Kevin, one, back to the earlier point, it resonates with employees deeply. So you're able to attract and retain talent. But secondly, it also resonates with consumers. We are in an age of conscious consumerism. Consumers are making buying decisions now based upon whether the person they're doing business with has values that align with their own values. And if they feel like there's a mismatch, they're moving their money. So you definitely stand out. You definitely have a competitive advantage if you can demonstrate that you've got a bigger purpose than just trying to make money and that you're going to act with integrity.
So the book is based around the idea of what you call the 6 C's. And we don't have time in this context to talk about them all. But before we go on, we are talking with Rob Chesnut, the author of Intentional Integrity. And if you're with us live and you've got a question or a comment, feel free to add them. I will see them and I'll be happy to share them. But in the book, you talk about the 6 C's, Rob. We can't talk about all of them really. If you want to why don't you just quickly tell us what the 6 are? Because I like alliteration as much as you do. So just give us the 6 to start with. And then I'd like you to talk about a couple that you feel is maybe the right thing to talk about today.
Sure. All right. Well, we'll start with CEO because it starts at the top. The next is a code of conduct. Then it's communication, right, about your code. Then it is a clear reporting system, consequences when there's a violation, and finally the constant drumbeat of communication around the issue. So those are the high level 6. And look, I'll do the first one because it's really important. And without the first one, the other 5 don't matter. The first one is CEO. Leaders set the tone. I like to say that a leader, a CEO, is a thermostat. Now, I say thermostat. A thermometer takes the temperature of a room. A thermostat sets it.
Adjusts it, yeah.
Right. And a CEO, by their words and actions, adjust that integrity thermostat. If they are, all they're talking about is hit this number, deliver this, no matter what, whatever it takes, do it. That sends a message that cut corners, but deliver. On the other hand, if a CEO talks about the importance of having multiple stakeholders, demonstrates empathy, and talks about the importance of following the law and doing the right thing for the long run, that sets the thermostat on the other side. And that temperature is what all employees in the company live in and are influenced deeply by. We all it's interesting when you look at some of the science around integrity. We want to feel good about ourselves, and we will act usually in our self-interest, but we will only go so far, because we will only act in our self-interest so far as we can still feel good about ourselves after doing it. Well, if we see a leader cutting corners ethically or putting pressure, basically threatening our jobs with something, it's so much easier to rationalize bad behavior.
Well, right?
Well, oh yeah, well, look, everybody's doing it, and the sales goals are what they are, and I know the other salespeople are doing this, so that's the only way I can keep up. Or they're underpaying me, so the only thing I can do to make up for this gross unfairness, right? And look, you've heard them all. There are lots of rationalizations, and there's only one reason to act with integrity, and that is because it's the right thing to do. But you know what? The CEO sets it all. And everybody lives in that environment. And if your CEO and top leadership aren't committed to acting with integrity, you can try to do all the other 5 things, but they're going to be perceived as hypocritical. And people will look at it with cynicism, because they're going to know that's not the way you get ahead at this company.
Well, exactly. And so there you go. We talked from the start about culture and integrity. And what you just said is exactly that. I define culture as the way we do things around here. And what you've just described is, well, that's how we do it. That's what everybody's doing. That's the way you get ahead around here. It's okay, because that's not as important around here. We go right on down the line, as you already said. So the CEO is certainly one of those, but not everyone who's watching and listening to us is in that spot. And so some people listening may be saying, well, man, I wish I need to dial my CEO in on this conversation, which is fair. But that they're not here, maybe, right? Some may be, but for those of us that aren't there, let's say that the thermostat is set at a pretty good level. Okay. Then what can we be doing as a leader? And I'm thinking maybe we want to think about this consistency of communication piece. You started with the first one. Let's talk a little bit about that last one.
Sure. Integrity is not the sort of thing that you can just do once and say, well, thank goodness we've checked that box. We've now got integrity, right? You see that with companies quite a bit. They get a code of ethics, right? But usually the code of ethics is something that they've downloaded off the internet from another company. And then they download it, they put their name at the top, and then they email it out to everybody, and they say, check a box. Say that
the trumpets all blare, blah, 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 right?
Certify you've done it. Well, thank goodness. Look, we've had a successful integrity campaign because all 3,500 employees have certified that they've read the code and are going to follow it. And that's practically speaking, that has no bearing whatsoever on a company's integrity. What we need if we want to have an impact on integrity is authentic human connection and authentic communication from leaders that it really matters. I talked to Adam Silver at the NBA as part of writing the book. I really admire his leadership. And he talks about it as it's almost like running a television ad campaign. You can't run a TV ad one time and think that you've reached people. You've got to repeat it multiple times. And then once you've done the repetition, then you got to do another TV ad and then a different TV ad. And because you got to keep engaging people. So it is a campaign, and it's a constant campaign. But if it comes with tremendous rewards if you do it right, just like a good brand marketing campaign.
Yeah, I love that idea. Integrity as a campaign, useful for us to think about. So for leaders at any level, and say we can continue to drive whatever the thermostat is set. Hopefully it's set at a good spot. What we need to be thinking about what we can continue to do in that regard. One of the things that
but let's not let leaders off the hook. I use the word CEO setting the thermostat. If you're a leader of a team, you're the local thermostat, right? So, people are looking at you. Like it or not, everybody on your team is watching how you behave and how you act. So you make a big difference because you're the one they see. They don't see the CEO every day or every week or every month. They're looking at you. So don't feel like you're off the hook. If you're leading a team, you've got big responsibility in this area.
And they're watching your feet more than your lips. It's not just that you shared the code, right? For sure. So speaking of code, in the book, you talk about what you call code moments. So first up, and I really liked this. I really like this idea. So I'd like you to to tell us, first of all, when you say something as a code moment, what is it?
Well, a code moment is when you are confronted with a situation that is will test you ethically, and you're on the line. And sometimes at the moment you find out about it, it's too late and things have blown up. And those are called, I call them in the book, code reds. But really, a code moment is an integrity moment where you are on the spot. Everyone's looking at you, and how you react in that moment will build trust or it will degrade you as a leader. Are you ready for it? Are you prepared for it? That's what the book is about, getting ready for those code moments.
Yeah, exactly. And
there are,
yeah,
we can do an example. I'll do one that's even not in the book. We'll do a bonus code moment here.
Bonus code moment, everybody.
All right. So I'm going to tell you a story. We had an open desking arrangement at Airbnb. Right. So I didn't have an office. I was I did a stand-up desk, a room with lots of other people. Guy walks up to me, mid-level manager in IT. I'm the general counsel of the company. Mid-level manager in IT walks up to me and says, Rob, introduces himself. He said, Rob, I noticed when you left your desk a little while ago, you didn't lock your computer screen. You left your computer screen open. And I'm like, oh. And, your natural reaction, I was just called out for a security violation, basically, right? And your natural reaction in the moment is be a little defensive, right?
Well,
yeah, like we got security guards down guarding the building. It's only Airbnb people here. I'm off over in this kind of corner. I just went to the restroom to get I got an iced tea. I wasn't even gone 5 minutes. Come on. But fortunately in the moment, right? In the moment, I thought, how much courage does it take for a mid-level manager to walk up to a senior executive in the company and call them out for doing something wrong? That's an act of courage. And you know what? That's what you want. You want to be at a place where people aren't afraid. I think I phrase it, to bring truth to power, to raise their hand and say, you know what? This isn't right. It's not being done right. Should we be acting that way? And when you find that, how you handle it in the moment is huge. If you act with defensiveness, then you discourage that sort of behavior. So fortunately, in the moment, I had the good judgment to realize, even though I had just engaged in a security violation, I realized what I needed to do. And so I immediately told him he was absolutely right. And how embarrassing it was for a leader in my position, particularly as general counsel, to do something like that, right? And because I thanked him profusely, he then said, hey, Rob, let me show you how with one click on your keyboard, you can lock it quickly and easily. And I said, fantastic. And I, to this day, now do it. But I did one more thing. We had a little award that we would use when we were with our ethics group. They were called Integra Yetis. They're these Yeti water bottles. They're really nice. They're metal. They're like this. I got one for my books, The Intentional Integrity, on there. But we had them with the Airbnb logo and our little integrity phrasing. And we would give them out when someone asked a good question or raised a good question about integrity. So the next time there was a larger group meeting, I stood up at the beginning and said, hey, everybody, I want to tell you a story. And I told the story of what an idiot I was from a security perspective and how one person had the courage to walk over and call me out on it. And I called him out, had him stand up, and I gave him an integrity Yeti in front of the whole group. And everybody applauded. A year later, as I'm leaving the general counsel role and moving on to an advisor, he sends me an email. And he said, Rob, I just want you to know that moment in front of everybody was my most satisfying career moment in 6 years at Airbnb. $30 water bottle, right? But it shows the power of knowing what sort of a culture you want to create. And then when you're in the moment, recognizing that you're facing an integrity moment and giving the right response. Because I'll tell you, I sent a powerful message not only to him, but to the several hundred people in the room that heard that story. The message is, hey, it's okay to call out a leader. It's okay to raise your hand and speak up. It's more important that we get things right.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that all of you that are watching or listening have both examples, the glowing ones and perhaps the not so glowing ones. And I would even say is if you don't have any of the ones where you got that you can immediately think of where you got defensive or you sort of pushed it back or you made an excuse, that perhaps you have selective memory. So the reality is this is what you're describing is how do we make integrity a part of the work, the culture of the organization. And so there's something that's happened in the last few months to all of us. It's called COVID, and it sent everybody to work from home, or many people obviously to work from home. So I'm just curious, not in the book, but I'm just curious, what connections or thoughts do you have about how we manage this and how we lead for integrity when we're not all in the same place?
Yeah, Kevin, I got something else for you. The book, the advanced copy of the book did not have anything about COVID, but the publisher came back to me at the end and asked me to do a
so
chapter.
I've got an incomplete book.
You've got an incomplete copy, so you're going to have to go out and help drive book sales for me by buying the actual version that came out, because the hardback and the final audio book and Kindle book has a final chapter on leading in a crisis, and it talks about COVID because it does change everything. You know what? I think it's a real test of leadership. You know, my mom used to tell me that a crisis reveals character. And it's true, I think, in your personal life, and it's true as a company. You know, and so a crisis is not an excuse to throw ethics to the side, saying, okay, well, you know, that's a nicety, right? We've got to get down to business. Well, the truth is, it is business. And it's such a powerful moment because there's so much fear when in COVID, right? People are isolated. They're working at home. They're worried about their health. They're worried about their jobs. Leaders have to recognize the fear and recognize that this is a time where people need to hear from you. They need clear, honest communication. You know, I mean, one thing leaders sometimes do is paint too rosy a picture. You know, yeah, I hate it in a crisis like COVID if a leader says, "Oh, don't worry, we're all in this together," because everybody's thinking, well, yeah, maybe we're all in it together, or maybe there's going to be a layoff, and then maybe some of us aren't all in it together, right?
The together will be a smaller number.
Yeah, it'll be us, but it'll be a smaller number of us. And look, people want direct talk. You know, at Airbnb, you know, Brian had a weekly meeting, and still does, every Thursday, all hands meeting for employees. Takes questions, including live questions. And it's not always pretty, you know, because he'll get some direct questions, which I think is a sign of a healthy organization. But he never went on in the beginning and said, it's all going to be okay, everybody, don't worry. Because what a crisis it was for any company in the travel business. And it wasn't all going to be okay. So, you know, but what Brian and the leadership of the company did was the first thing they did was they sacrificed first. I hate it when I see a company lay off 2,000 people and then the leadership hands out big bonuses to the executives. Nothing worse. So I think leaders need to sacrifice first. Take a deep, meaningful compensation cut if they're going to be doing a lot of layoffs. And secondly, I think Brian was really open. Said, look, in the beginning, he said, I don't know where this is going to take us. Our business has gone from thriving to almost a standstill overnight. And of course, there are going to have to be changes. And I don't know what they are yet. And as soon as we figure it out, we're going to let you know. Well, you know what? I think people appreciate that kind of direct communication. And I also think that if you have the resources, treat others with empathy and kindness. Even though Airbnb needed to let go of a number of people, there was, I think, a generous severance package and little things like letting people keep their work laptop. Because we all realize, you know, Airbnb doesn't need a lot of used laptops. We're cutting back on people. And the people that are being laid off may need a laptop at home to search for a new job because they may have a child that's using the home computer, if there's a home computer, to go to school. So, you know, little things like that show that you really care go a long way, not only for the people that are leaving, but it also says something to the people who are staying.
Yeah, I think that's really great. So, Rob, I've got about 4 more questions for you total, but the last sort of one on the content, if you will, is what's the question that I should have asked you that I didn't? Or is there one thing that you would like for us to have talked about that we didn't?
And we didn't talk much about the science of integrity, which I think is pretty interesting. You know what? When I started this journey of writing the book, I think you start writing a book thinking like I really know something, so I'm gonna write this book about what I know, and I started out that way too. But what I found was that a book is actually a learning journey. So I kind of thought, well, it'd probably be smart of me to get some quotes from a few other people. So I started going out to talk to other people, and that's when I really started learning. And one of the people I went out to talk to was a guy at Duke University by the name of Dan Ariely. He's a behavioral scientist. Mm-hmm. He studies dishonesty. He studies bad behavior. You may have seen TED Talks. He's got books. He's really well known in the field. And he sat down with me for an afternoon. And what I discovered was that quite accidentally, some of the things that we were doing at Airbnb actually had some science behind them, although we didn't know it at the time. I think I used to think, because I was a federal prosecutor, I used to think that there are good people and bad people, right? There are people that have integrity and that don't have integrity. So all you got to do is just kind of figure out the ones that don't have integrity and weed them out somehow, and then you're going to have a great group, right? That's actually not true. The reality is that,
which is good, because otherwise you might be the one without it. Just saying.
Right, exactly. Right? I mean, thank goodness, I've got a shot here. The truth is that almost everyone has a struggle going on inside of them. There's a story that Billy Graham tells. It's again not in the book, about a Cherokee chief meeting with his son, and he told the son, there are two wolves fighting inside of me. One is a good wolf, and the good wolf has empathy, cares for others, is looking for ways to build consensus, and is genuinely kind. And the bad wolf it looks at everything as a zero-sum game, right? Is always taking for themselves, selfish, vain, lacks humility. And the son says to the father, well, which wolf will win the fight inside of us? And the chief said, the one that you feed. And there's a scientific fact to back that up. We all have the potential to lie, cheat, and do bad things. None of us are perfect. We are deeply, deeply influenced, though, by our environment and by how we think others around us are acting and how others perceive us. And if others are behaving with integrity and integrity is rewarded, that feeds the good wolf and actually encourages us and brings out the best in us. Whereas, of course, the opposite is true. If people are cutting corners all around us, it gives us an excuse, a rationale for saying, look, I can do this. It's okay. And even more interesting, companies that have a highly creative workforce or highly intelligent workforces are particularly vulnerable to integrity problems. Why? Well, because people who are really creative and really smart are also really good at rationalizing things, right? Yeah. They can come up with a reason to back up just about anything they do. And so you've got to be really mindful, particularly in those sorts of cultures, to create that environment and feed that good wolf.
When you're not studying integrity and working with organizations to help build integrity, what do you do for fun, Rob?
Well, I've got two kids, and one of the blessings of COVID is that my daughter is doing college remotely, so I get to hang out with my daughter, and my son is also doing his 8th grade from home as well. I love hanging out with kids, playing golf, a little basketball with my son, hanging out and talking to my daughter, and watching TV with him, maybe watching a little basketball.
All right. So the question is he beating you at one-on-one yet? That's the question.
Man, you know what? He is shooting up there. He's in 8th grade. He got a size 12.5 shoe, and he's 6 foot already. So I've got the upper hand, but barely.
Not for long.
Not for long.
Not for long, because the trajectories of the curves here are not in your favor, Rob.
Yeah, it's not looking good for him.
So something that I ask people that have been with us, have listened to the podcast before, know or expecting I'm going to ask this question. I always ask this question. And my dad said always is a very long time. What are you reading these days, Rob?
And I was ready for that question as well. And, the book I just finished reading was Adam Grant's Give and Take. And I found it to be really powerful. And the reason I enjoyed it so much is, the thesis of his book really is that, There are people in life that are givers and those that are takers. Givers are constantly looking out for others, trying to help others. Whereas takers are constantly, again, that zero-sum game, always trying to take as much of the pie for themselves. And the point of the book is that givers actually do better, even financially, than takers do, which is not what you'd think. And when I reflected on it, I thought, well, that's really what my book is about, but for companies, that companies need to have multiple stakeholders. They need to be thinking beyond just a quarterly profit number, doing anything to hit the number. They've got to think about an obligation to society as a whole. And when they do that, their financial performance actually improves, and they outdo the rest of the market. So I thought, wow, this is the perfect complement to the sort of things I'm talking about in the corporate world.
Absolutely. So Rob, where can we learn more about what you're up to, connect with you, get the book? Here's the chance. Tell us where.
I mentioned there's a book. The book's called.
You mentioned that there's a book.
It's called Intentional Integrity. You can buy it through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your local bookstore, which I love local bookstores. You can learn more about it at www.intentionalintegrity.com. And Kevin, for your listeners, if they would like, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I do posts on LinkedIn about integrity almost every day. And just mention that you heard me on Kevin's podcast, and I'd be happy to connect with you and continue the discussion there.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Rob. Question for all of you who are watching and listening, whether it's live or whether it's later. The question is, now what? What are you going to do with this? Regardless of where you sit in the organization, Rob reminded you they're always watching you. What are you going to do? Are you a leader who's willing to tell your team to go big? Are you someone who wants to create a place where your team members will be proud to be there? There's 100 things that I wrote down as we went along. The challenge for you is, what action will you take as a result of having spent some time with Rob? And so, Rob, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure to have you. So it took us a while to make this happen. We started to do it once. We had internet problems. Finally, we made it happen.
It was worth it. It was worth the wait. Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate the opportunity.
It was my pleasure. And everybody, before we go, you know that we're here every week and you can join us, and that's great. But if you want to be more involved, and in fact, you want to make sure that you get access to these lives when they get scheduled, you want to join us in our Facebook or podcast groups, Facebook or LinkedIn groups, remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook, remarkable.com/LinkedIn. You can do that there. And man, we'd love feedback. So if you want to give us some stars, we'd love that as well. But what we'd like the most is for you to be back next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.